Hi, I'm Kevin Werbach, professor of legal studies and business ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies, from broadband to blockchain. Today, AI is promising to transform our world. But AI needs accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's developed and deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. On this episode, I speak with Ravit Dotan. She's the founder and CEO of TechBetter, an AI consulting firm, and director of the Collaborative AI Responsibility Lab at the University of Pittsburgh. She has been named one of the 100 billion women in AI ethics and won a Distinguished Paper Award at FACT, the top AI ethics conference. We discuss how her approach to AI ethics and governance has evolved across her career, the biggest problems holding back the field, and the way she's recently rethought her entire approach. Ravit, welcome. Thank you for joining me on the road to accountable AI.
Hi. Great to be here.
Tell me first about your journey into work on AI ethics and governance.
Yeah. It's been a long road with various milestones, but I guess officially I switched to this space in 2021 after I finished my PhD. So it just kind of started organically consulting to various organizations, mainly tech companies, but also investors, local governments, on how to do everything under the umbrella, like develop it responsibly, procure it responsibly, invest in it responsibly. So that's what I've been doing in the industry. But I don't know if I would say that that is exactly my starting point, because in 2017 is where I started doing AI ethics within academia. So I was doing a PhD in philosophy at UC Berkeley. And that's when I guess officially started with AI ethics. But I'm not even sure that that would be my official starting point because how did I fund all of this education? I worked in tech. And so I think it was, what year was that? Was when I started my master's. So I don't know, like 2011 something. I worked in the first company that was an AI company. So yeah.
What was it like making the shift from doing a PhD in philosophy to working advising companies and other organizations?
You know, night and day, honestly. I'll share an anecdote to explain how it was like. My field wasn't ethics, but of course I knew the fundamentals. I taught ethics, and one of my friends from my PhD program asked me, like a couple years in or something. He asked me, "So, you do AI ethics? Do you find yourself using some of the things that you've learned?" And I said, "Actually, I never thought of it, but it never comes up,
Hmm.
not even once."
Wow.
Yeah. So I was in a way surprised, but in other ways it makes sense.
Other than that, it's much more applied as opposed to theoretical. What's different in terms of talking to corporate leaders about these issues versus thinking about them in the more philosophical context?
Okay, I'll continue with the same anecdote.
Yeah.
Because when I said no, my friend was
Yeah. Yeah.
surprised. Uh, and he asked me, "What do you mean? So what happens when you are, on a call with a
Mhm.
client, um, and they describe and they argue about the decision that they have to make that, has like ethical implications. Don't you want to sometimes jump in and say something like, well, what you're saying is like virtue theory, and according to it, da 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 da. But the other person, it's actually consequentialism. It's not just saying that, da 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 da." And I laugh. No, absolutely not. That would be completely out of place. Uh, because I think the role that philosophy plays is more laying out options. But when we are in a workplace, we want to make decisions. And
Mm.
it's different.
But there have to be some foundations for making those decisions. The decision can't just be, what do we think will be in our business interests, at least in the short run. There's got to be some way of wrestling with a difficult issue about some AI implementation that might have some risks or some possible harms. So how do you help companies in terms of thinking through those things?
Right. Not necessarily by talking about the ethics
Yeah.
aspect, because honestly, often these are clear.
Mm.
They understand we need to do X. But the problem is the roadblocks in the way to do X. And I think that is a problem that's a bit underappreciated because we do have so many guidelines now, right? Um, we do have risks that are more familiar than they were in the past. But what I see in companies is dealing with internal systems and don't necessarily prioritize that. So knowing how to manage the internal dynamics so that the decision that is clear to everyone could be executed. And that seems to be more of a challenge.
Hmm. And in addition to the consulting work, you also have still continued to do academic work in this area.
Yeah.
How do you balance those different kinds of activities?
You know, it feels very natural. And sometimes I'm thinking about it like when you were in academia, traditionally people divided to three types of things: research, teaching, and service, right? And it feels kind of the same. I do research in some of my time, but instead of teaching, I have consulting. So it feels very familiar in that sense.
Does the research influence the consulting, or conversely, the consulting influence how you think about what to do for research?
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the big changes that I've made. I'm calling it, I don't like the name kind of practical philosophy or something
Mhm.
like that. I prefer the name engaged.
Mm.
Um, I think that research and consulting are best when they inform one another very, very deeply. So I
Mhm.
am still doing research, but not philosophy. I've switched to social science. I mean, not only, but I collaborate with people in social
Mhm.
science or in computer science, and then I write papers that help me understand the trends that I'm seeing within industry
Mhm.
and think about them in a more systematic way, right?
Mhm.
And then I take what I learn from that academic research, and then I use it when I work with clients, when I do thought leadership, all of those things.
What are the trends that you're seeing, or have seen over the last several years in this area of AI governance?
Yeah, okay. Many, because different angles, different things. But here, maybe I would want to highlight one of them because it's my favorite. One group that I collaborate with, they are organizational psychologists, which I think is such a crucial dimension of AI governance that is a bit neglected. When we see all the frameworks, they are prescribing systems that organizations should have, right? They should have a risk management framework, right? They should have an, I don't know, like an AI ethics champion or whatever. They say all those things, but they don't really talk about how do you deal with the realities of the organization.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what I'm interested in because that's what's going to make AI ethics stick. Early on, I've done many projects that organization is super excited at the beginning and I'll write whatever report that they want or framework or principles, whatever. And I think that they are genuinely excited. I don't think they're lying. But then it doesn't happen.
Mm.
Why? It goes back to this organizational reality. Apparently, it's a well-known phenomenon called decoupling that people have studied in organizational psychology
Mm.
when there is separation between what the organization says and what the organization does. And so a lot of people are critical about that. We read about AI ethics washing, and that's what it feels like. And yeah, I also have critique about it. Like it feels uncomfortable, especially when you are in one of those companies and you are the person who's being used, as window
Mhm.
dressing. But the more interesting question is, what can we do?
Yeah.
And right, are there different types? And what can we do for each of those different types? And so one of the papers that I had written recently is exactly about that. Can we understand the different kinds of AI ethics washing, especially using this literature on decoupling
Mhm.
that already exists? And then can we understand how we can help organizations in different buckets, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've noticed is that some of the recommendations from the well-known frameworks are going to be counterproductive depending on the decoupling profile or the AIFX washing profile that we see
Mm.
in the organization.
Can you give an example of some of the guidance for a particular kind of organization?
Yeah. Okay. So one practice that's very widespread today is having a committee or a process to approve AI use cases or AI applications before, early on, hopefully not
Hmm.
after they have already been, ready for deployment. Especially this trend, I think, has become more and more established in light of the EUAI Act because companies want to make sure that they don't have use cases that fall in the unacceptable risk category or even in the high risk category. They would rather catch it early and kind of push it down. And so they have committees or forms that need to be submitted for engineers or the product manager, whoever, to say, this is what we're doing and we want approval, right? So that's a very, very common process. And also, a lot of the frameworks recommend exactly something like this. And it does make sense. But what are we seeing in practice, right? We're seeing that often these processes are not implemented very smoothly. So it might be that there's inconsistency over time. At one point, they will be implemented, but later they're not. Or there might be inconsistency across the organization. Some teams do it and some teams don't, or
Yeah.
inconsistent even between employees. And what we're seeing also is that a lot of employees, they try to avoid it. They're like, I know there's this process, but we try not to have to do it. So we'll
Hmm.
say that we'll say this is not a new model. We'll try to pass it under like a existing model's name, right? They'll try to resist. They'll try to avoid. And what's worse, we are seeing really tension within companies because those who are required to undergo this process are a bit resentful even sometimes of those teams who are enforcing the processes, right? And that's not productive. It's not what we want.
Is there a way to overcome that?
Yeah. So one of the reasons I collaborated with the organizational psychologists is that they have already seen this
Mm.
in spaces that are similar, like DEI, like safety, like physical safety, like in factories, and even in privacy. And according to the theory that we are working with, theory of organizational climate, what needs to shift is the climate in the organization. So it's not about adding a training or putting someone in charge, right? Or doing a survey about their risks. It's definitely not about adding more layers to this cumbersome process. It's not about adding even more strict like enforcement mechanisms. So climate is um, how the employees perceive what the organization expects from them.
Mhm.
Culture is maybe around values or something like that, but the climate is what do the employees think that the organization really, really wants.
Yeah.
Um, so, for example, if an organization has like high privacy climate, it means that the employees perceive that the organization really prioritizes
Mhm.
um, privacy climate. Um, what does AI ethic climate means, right? It means that the employees in the organization perceive that it's really important to the organization. And so you ask, what we can do. And the research in those other adjacent fields shows that what we need to do is improve the climate. That's what we need to do. That's what's going to shift things. And it may not necessarily mean, like I said before, going harder on those policies.
Although then that leads to the next question, which is how do organizations improve the climate? Because presumably it's not just announce we really care about AI ethics.
That's right. Yeah, great question. Because it's exactly where our research is going.
Yeah.
Another thing that we're seeing from the adjacent fields is the critical role that middle management actually plays.
Mhm.
So in other fields, we've seen that when the middle management engages with the kind of the staff that's on the ground in a certain way, about this topic, like, talks about it with them, right? Sets a personal example, makes it a part of like the day-to-day operations of the work. That really, really matters. Also matters because we're talking about ethics, right? It matters whether the leadership of the organization is perceived as ethical
Mhm.
because it's not a separate topic, right? Um, and I've seen it even in the interviews that I did as part of this research, the first one that we finished already. In some organizations they haven't started implementing AI ethics yet at that point, right? But employees are sure that they will. Why?
Mhm.
Because they believe that the leadership is ethical. right? Even if it's unrelated things, they say they don't lie. So I believe they will do, they'll deal with AI in an ethical way, which seems unrelated, but it
Mhm.
is when you understand the theory.
Right, because it creates the overall climate.
Yeah.
Makes sense. One of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you was a post on your Substack recently, the AI Treasure Chest, talking about a recent pivot that you made and how you're approaching AI ethics. So can you talk more about that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me because this is the thing that I talk about all the time now. When you get excited about a new topic, that's exactly the stage that I'm in. So maybe I'll start with things that I've observed, kind of like to add to where this conversation had gone. I in my work earlier, right around 2021, 2022, even. There was so much excitement about AI governance. It was not that difficult to find companies that really want to try. There was a lot of, many conversations about that, a lot of talks, all of this. It just felt like this is the time, like a boom of AI governance. Um, I feel that there's been a decline in the level of interest. And I've identified several reasons for it, and all of those reasons were the reasons from my shift. And I'll explain what they are because then I can explain the shift that I've done and why. One trend that I've noticed, well, I'm seeing that resistance in organizations, like I talked about, and I think some of it comes from organizational issues. But I also think that some changes that happened in regulations have contributed to it. So maybe ironically, but I think that the EUAI Act has pushed ethics out of the conversation because people became, yeah, kind of. I kind of expected the opposite, but it does make sense because the conversations that I'm hearing about now are way more focused on compliance, like
Mhm.
that, right? Like the structure that I've described. They
Mhm.
just want compliance, and more specifically, compliance with EUAI Act. It reminds me a little bit of GDPR in privacy in that sense. Like the only conversations really I'm hearing about privacy are not around the ethics on it. They're around compliance.
Mhm.
And so it feels like right now, at least, or it felt like this for the last year, that there's a shift. It's way more difficult to talk about ethics. When was the last time a company wanted to talk to me about fairness? I don't even remember. They're
Wow.
just not as interested. Um, so that's one shift that happens, just a drop in the interest level of companies. Another shift that has happened is a boom in generative AI that started in 2022. And with it came two things. One, um, a topic like ethics is always perceived as a red tape, as a barrier, right? It's always going to be like that. And maybe it's good even, but it became even more so after this generative AI boom. Because now when you talk to people about AI, what they want to talk to you about is adoption, adoption, adoption.
Mhm.
Why? By the way, because it all fails. Like we see it, right? In surveys, except for surveys made by companies that sell AI. But except for them, the surveys we're seeing, like there's not, recent MIT survey said that 95% of all AI pilots don't continue.
Yeah, I wouldn't rely on that particular number,
That's
but there's other
yeah,
data that is useful. That
yeah.
particular one,
You
I
didn't make it?
posted on LinkedIn. It's questionable, but you're right. There are data
Yeah.
points.
I mean, I will say that it's not the most rigorous that I've seen, but I trust it more than like I saw OpenAI just recently came up with a white paper. I was like, yeah, I'm not, no.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
even when it's the big four who publish them because they also have a stake in it, right? They're trying to sell consulting businesses. So at least I'm like, okay, I
Yep.
don't have those interests. I can actually see the methodology, which is more than others. But anyway, yeah, we see that they don't succeed. So I think companies now, even more, they just when I try to talk to them about AI, they just want to hear about how to adopt, you know? So that decreases their interest in talking with me about ethics. And then the third thing is I think that the AI governance space hasn't really shifted into how do we govern AI adoption, right? Because I think also they have gone more into how do we deal with compliance? Um, and then also, I mean, as always, when we get frameworks from big organizations, they usually apply to those huge companies, right? And this
Mhm.
is also something that I've seen. The smaller companies are like, this is against us. Um, and so those three things that have happened. And in addition, because what I've seen is the tension that happens within companies. All of those things just made me think there's got to be a better way to do this.
Mm.
I don't want to be that kind of perceived as the roadblock
Mhm.
that's going
Yep.
to stop their innovation, right? Because it's not effective and it's becoming less and less effective. So I kept thinking, how do I do it differently? What can I do that's going to be different? And I realized while there's a challenge here, the one that I described, there's also an opportunity. Because one of my insights is that we can't be separating the ethics or governance component from the excitement and the building new things component, right? That's a part of the problem, right? So when I think, for example, about how courses go that teach AI, right? Maybe at best they'll have a unit at the end, ethics, and the unit will be dropped because the course will run out of time and it sends exactly what kind of a signal. That's what happens when you separate. And so I thought, kind of in analogy to teaching, right? Instead of putting it as a unit at the end, embed it organically
Mhm.
throughout, right? Um, at each and every place. And I realized, but wait, I could be not just a person who says to people, here's how to be responsible, right? But to say to people, I'm going to touch with you on your biggest pain point related to AI, which is how do we actually adopt it?
Uh,
And as I teach it to you, ingrained in every part of it is going to be how do we do it ethically?
that makes a lot of sense, but isn't there an inherent tension sometimes between what leads to adopting quickly and what leads to adopting in the most responsible way?
Yeah, um, definitely. But also because of, people are not new to AI now,
Mm.
many people, and they have tried this quick adoption and they see that it doesn't work.
Mm.
They see that adoption is not happening. People in the organization are not doing it. They see that often the outputs are actually very poor quality. Like the emperor is a bit naked or a lot naked, right? And so people who understand that are ready to have this more thoughtful conversation.
You've talked about, the what you call the chef approach to AI
Yeah.
governance. What does that mean?
In the public conversation about AI, there's a common way that people talk about it. It's as if we're supposed to be using AI only to offload tasks and say, AI, give me my draft document, give me my draft email, whatever. Um, right? Like the whole point is to offload because they're trying to convince us that those tools can replace us.
Right.
So it's going to replace us if we offload. So I call this the takeout approach because it's like getting takeout, right? When I get takeout, I don't want to deal with it. I just want to put in my order and get my food. I may not even know how to cook the food. I probably don't because I'm not a really good cook. I just want to get it and as fast as possible. And I might revise some things at the end. I could add salt. I could move it to a different plate. I probably won't, but I could. But this, you see, this is the whole approach. I'm using the AI to just get my final output.
Yeah.
That's the most common approach that I've seen. I don't think I mean, it's helpful sometimes, not discounting it. But if it's the only thing that we do, where you're just going to be very limited. So I've created an alternative. And that's what I'm calling the chef approach. The main point is to think about processes instead of thinking of just outputs. Okay, so I'm creating a process to take myself through to get to the outcome I want.
Yeah.
And maybe the best way to explain it is with an example. So I'll do an example. One of the most common usages for AI is brainstorming. I want ideas. AI just like give me my ideas. Okay. And so for example, um, give me a topic that you want to brainstorm about.
How to build an AI governance plan.
Okay, great. How to build an AI governance plan. Uh, the traditional quote unquote way to do it is to go to the chatbot and say, chatbot, tell me,
Yeah.
tell me the way to build an AI governance plan. And it will spit something at you. And it will be probably cliche, and probably include misinformation, and probably not incorporating your expertise, and probably not customized to what you need. That's the take-it approach. Just like, give me my pad thai. I want it now. I don't want to worry about it. Another way to do it is to say, I'm going to build a process for me to brainstorm about this topic. So it can go something like this. You just write instructions in English or whatever language to the chatbot and say, chatbot, you're going to take me through a process now. I'm going to first, like step number 1, I'm going to tell you something that I want to be thinking about. 2, you are going to ask me 3 follow-up questions to deepen my thinking about this topic. 3, you are going to create a summary of what I just said. Right? And then you put that in, just like into the chat window even. It can be that simple. And then, okay, what's your topic? I want to think about AI governance. And then you say, here are my initial thoughts, because you already have thoughts on the topic, right? And then you get this drill down. And then in the end, you get something that is actually based on your thoughts. It's a deeper process that you take yourself through.
And then how does that impact on the ethics and governance questions, whether it's bias or privacy or accuracy?
Yeah, perfect. Because once you do it that way, you also get an opportunity to add a lot of guidelines inside, such as, and I always add this, never be biased. Yeah. You would be amazed how much a sentence like this can actually impact your output. I will say that it really depends on the chatbot. And in my experience, Claude listens more than ChatGPT and Gemini the least. But that is just, I don't want to badmouth anyone because it's been a while since I've tested. But anyway, yeah, you can add your guidelines. So for example, I created a process like this to create cover images for my Substack newsletter, like you just said, the AI treasure chest. And I just wanted a prompt for the image because I have my favorite image generator that didn't train on stolen data, so I just used that. But I wanted the prompt. And I wanted the prompt to include both kind of a sentence description of what the image should show, but I also wanted a style. When you ask for style, you get really close to, copyright infringement risk, right? Which, we've seen many complaints about that. So I've added a guideline, never suggest styles that name specific people, right? If the user ever asks for something like that, refuse, and instead just offer a general description.
Got it. I want to go back to one thing that you talked about earlier, which is the shift to generative AI in terms of how that changes the environment. What else should we be thinking differently about in this area now that we're in an increasingly Gen AI world?
Okay, I'm going to touch on AI governance because that's our topic.
Yeah.
When we think of all the guidelines, right, that say to engineers what they should be doing, the reality is that one of the shifts that engineering is undergoing now is way more incorporation of generated code. Can we give them instructions on how to do that responsibly? Because currently, it's not really working. A research paper that I've seen said that an estimated 40% of generated code has cybersecurity infringement issues. Different papers showed the different numbers, but that's kind of like the average. It was like a meta overview, I guess. And that's only about cybersecurity. I don't know that anyone has checked for the other risks, like bias, for example, or anything else, like all like the umbrella of them. And also that engineers, even when they see those mistakes, they often do not fix them because they just kind of take what they get. Even when they know it's false, they still don't fix it. You see, that is a new source of AI risks that I don't think anyone is really handling.
But it gets back to the same question you were talking about earlier. If the coders are just focused on addressing some problem, having to think about cyber risk or something like that, they're not necessarily incentivized to do that.
Yes, exactly. Which is where this chef approach comes in. Because what they also don't know what to do is actually adopt AI as users. Even when you talk to an engineer who's very proficient, right? They write AI code. They have not necessarily thought of creating processes for themselves. And I've
Right.
done this with engineers, right?
Right.
And then they're not getting the output that they want. And then you can explain to them, well, instead of expecting, the chatbot to just give you your code, where I can just like spit it at you, take out way, why don't I teach you how to build a process that's
Mm,
going to get you where you want to go? And also, by the way, you want to be responsible.
mm.
Let me explain to you how to incorporate those guardrails within it.
Yeah, it's interesting because in traditional coding, at least within big companies and tech companies, there are whole code quality processes and mechanisms for doing those cyber reviews. You're working at Microsoft, they're not going to put anything into production without working through those elements. But it seems like now when we're in this world when people can just vibe code and speak into the AI agent, some of that potentially gets left by the wayside. It sounds like it's part of what you're saying.
And with AI ethics topics, it's even worse because, and I've seen this in my research, in some of the topics, the ones who are responsible for kind of ringing the bell are the same engineers who are going to be expected to then fix it. And so they just
Mm,
won't ring that bell,
mm.
right?
All comes back to incentives.
Yeah, and also in resisting that separation between the topics.
Mm,
Because one reason that they won't ring it is because they don't know how to solve it, right?
mm,
Because those teams from AI governance are often, they don't have the bandwidth, right, to really help with it. But what if you can tell to the engineer, listen, I know you want to be responsible. We all do. Look, this is who we are. Most people want to do it, but they don't because of various constraints.
mm,
But you can say to them, listen, but let me teach you how. If you even just add those guardrails, it's already gonna be better, right? Um, and if you teach them how to loop themselves into the process so that they can review it better. Because when we do this takeout mode with AI, we're also not very inclined to actually review it. Because the whole point was to offload it. Now you have to like
mm.
really review this like super long code. No, you don't want to do it.
What's the most important thing for organizations to do to get started on this path of taking responsibility, integrating those functions?
I think it starts with teaching.
Yeah.
With wherever you build your employees' skill set, embed it there, not as a unit at the end that is going to be dropped, right? But as an organic part of teaching new skills. I think that's a great way to begin. And also, what I'm learning from the organizational psychologists, it's all about incorporating middle management.
Right. Well, we need to wrap up, but Ravi, thank you so much. Been a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening. If you want to go deeper on AI governance, trust, and responsibility with me and other distinguished faculty of the world's top business school, sign up for the next cohort of Wharton's Strategies for Accountable AI online executive education program, featuring live interaction with faculty, expert interviews, and custom-designed asynchronous content. Join fellow business leaders to learn valuable skills you can put to work in your organization. Visit execed.wharton.upenn.edu/ACAI for full details. I hope to see you there.